Good afternoon, everyone. This is Varun from WWF-India. On behalf of WWF and CII, we welcome you all to this webinar on Group Captive Policy for Renewable Energy. We would like to thank you, express our gratitude to all of you for making time to attend this webinar. So we are hosting this webinar under our Renewable Energy Demand Enhancement Initiative, which is called REDE, for commercial and industrial consumers, initiated by WWF-India in partnership with Confederation of Indian Industry. The initiative aims to build an alliance among corporate buyers to increase commitment to RE procurement and also to catalyze solutions to address challenges that are significantly restricting demand. The initiative provides a national forum to discuss the challenges to large-scale corporate RE procurement, co-develop solutions, and also build greater capacity for CNI consumers through several areas like the policy engagement, capacity building, member networking, global connect, and market intelligence. So under the initiative, we recently published our report, Renewable Energy Demand in India, Corporate Bias Perspective, which traces the magnitude of corporate RE demand and its role in increasing renewable energy uptake in India. The report was launched by Mr. Jamshed Godrej, Chairman Godrej and Boyce in Mumbai, at a joint event of WWF India and the Climate Group. So we had surveyed around 100 corporates on their renewable energy procurement trends, and this report highlights their interest in increasing their RE capacity, the rationale for their commitments, and the challenges that they are facing in RE uptake. We are very glad to share that the report has been well received by a multitude of stakeholders, and we've received positive feedback from many of you. Under the initiative, we have developed a common set of asks from the CNI customers, and these are called the bias principles, so to say, and the bias principles entail long-term regulatory and policy stability, to create a favorable environment for renewable energy offtake and investment. And also we are looking at greater choice for RE uptake for the renewable energy for the CNI customers, which includes providing options such as purchasing unbundled renewable energy on preferential and direct contract basis, also to provide opportunities to engage with regulators and utilities to provide more options for renewable energy purchasing, and also an option to source power directly from generation sources such as the solar parks and the wind farms. The third buyer principle looks at providing options for low risk firm power at competitive prices and ultimately capacity building to enhance the uptake of renewable energy. So we and CII jointly invite CNI customers and the corporate users of renewable energy to be a part of this REDE initiative, and we would invite you to send us your expression of interest to take it forward. And as a part of this initiative, I would like to apprise you of the activities that we are carrying out. We are developing some knowledge products on state policies, where we are looking at some specific suggestions for some state governments. And also we are reviewing the global RE procurement models and their key takeaways for the Indian context. And also we are working on capacity building modules for the CNI customers. So we will be sharing all these with you for your feedback and your suggestions shortly going forth. So as a part of this initiative, this is the first webinar that we are hosting today, and we'll be hosting a series of webinars on the corporate RE procurement every month. So the next webinar in line in this series will be in the first week of August. So we'll keep you apprised of the topics and the agenda going forth. So this is all on the Renewable Energy Demand Enhancement Initiative from our side. And now I'd like to invite our first speaker for today. We have two distinguished speakers. One is Mr. Vinay Rustagi from Bristol, India. And the second speaker is Mr. Amit Maheshwari from Trilegal. So I'll just briefly give you an introduction of Mr. Vinay Rustagi. Vinay is the Managing Director of Bristol India Energy and has been leading Bristol India's activities for clients such as World Bank, IFC, Fortum, DFID, several multilateral and private agencies, and has been working on the areas such as policy design, market and entry strategy, and project finance for renewable energy. He's been leading Bristol India team for providing project development advisory services for multiple clients, and he's responsible for day-to-day functioning and client management for all the work carried out by Bristol India. So now I'll hand it over to Vinay.
Thank you, Varun. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Very good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to be on this call, and thank you to WWF for inviting us. So we believe that there is a very strong impetus in procurement of renewable energy by the CNI consumers in India. And group captive policy has a very important role to play, and that is why we've chosen this topic. Now, what we're going to do is over the next about 15 odd minutes, we will just very broadly lay out what is the landscape in terms of renewable energy procurement in India. What is the role played by group captive policy? What does the policy actually say, and what's been the experience of the developers and the consumers so far? And what does the future landscape look like, particularly in view of some of the recent amendments and regulatory moves across India? So just a very quick introduction for the benefit of those who may not be aware or be familiar with Bridge to India. So we are a specialist renewables focused consulting and research company.
Vinay, just sorry to interrupt you. Can you just make your presentation mode to full screen? So you can just change it. So from the view option, you can make it full screen. So it will be better for the audiences. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Thank you so much. Yes, that's excellent. Thanks.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I will just gives us a very unique vantage point in the market and allows us to offer a strong domain expertise to clients. And we work with people across the energy sector, so that includes developers, investors, equipment suppliers, as well as developmental institutions, think tanks, and policymakers. We have a growing bundle of research products. And very quickly, if I may, just before I go to group captive policy and open access market, etc., I just want to introduce indiasolarnavigator.com to you, which is an online portal produced by us. It's a very exciting product which has 24/7 information, very comprehensive updates on the sector, both rooftop solar and ground-mounted solar. So please do have a look and let us know if you're interested in exploring it further. Just to lay out where we are in this RE procurement market as far as the C&I consumers are concerned. So obviously the key elements of renewable energy here are wind and solar. We have given the data on the slide only for solar because even though we know that there is about 4,000 megawatts of wind capacity which is contracted by C&I consumers, we unfortunately don't have the annual breakup. My guess is that most of that wind capacity was commissioned in the early part of the decade, and today there is very little new wind capacity which is being set up purely for C&I consumers. And so now the incremental activity in this market is restricted mainly to solar sector. And as you can see, both open access solar and rooftop solar have grown and are growing strongly year on year. We estimate open access solar capacity to be about somewhere around 4 gigawatts as of today. Similarly, we estimate the C&I part of rooftop solar, private C&I part of rooftop solar to be just more over 3 gigawatts. So that's about 7 gigawatts of solar plus 4 gigawatts of wind, 11 gigawatts of renewable capacity supplying power to RE consumers, to C&I consumers. Now, given that wind is really out of the picture as far as new capacity addition is concerned, and now we are focusing on open access and rooftop solar. Rooftop solar, while it is very, very attractive because obviously there is no land and transmission capacity required for that, the constraint there which is faced by the consumers is, of course, that there is a limitation on the rooftop space that is available. In most cases, consumers can't get more than 5 to 10% of their power consumption from the space on the premises. So really, if any consumer wants to go to a larger percentage of RE consumption, open access is the main option for these consumers. Now, open access, in theory, it is very, very attractive. It is the cost of open access power today is about somewhere around 3 to 3.5 rupees. including open access charges of, let's say, about 2 to 2.5 rupees, it still offers savings over grid tariffs of anything between 25 to 50% across India. So that is financially very, very attractive. Now, there are 2 or 3 main challenges when it comes to open access solar power. The first one, of course, is that the distribution companies, the utilities in India, do not want to lose their CNI customers because they pay the highest grid tariffs. And the loss of these customers poses a big financial risk to the viability of the distribution companies. And the consequence is that the distribution companies, together with the state policy making bodies, etc., are actually pushing back on open access solar, and they're pushing back in many different ways. They're making it difficult for open access projects to get approvals, to get connectivity approvals to the grid. They're making it difficult. There is uncertainty in how the open access charges are levied because there's a lot of volatility and changes as we go along on an annual basis almost in the levy of open access charges, which doesn't really allow long-term planning and viability assessment of these projects. And then third, of course, is that you require land and transmission connectivity. Now, land and transmission, we are facing major constraints across India right now. And really, it is not within the capacity of CNI consumers to arrange land in an off-site location, to arrange transmission access, and to build these projects on their own. And that is why, actually, if you look at all these problems which are faced in open access solar, that is where a group captive suddenly comes into picture, and we believe has a very, very important role to play in the CNI renewable energy market. Now, group captive is a principle which is enshrined in the Electricity Act, and there are Electricity Rules 2005, which basically conceive a captive project as being a project where there are a group of consumers who at least own 26% of equity and consume at least 51% of the power from that project. And the moment these 2 thresholds are met, a project can be deemed as a group captive project. Now that the premise of the group captive principle was to allow smaller consumers who may not have had the financial or the operational wherewithal to come together and co-develop group captive projects together with other like-minded CNI consumers. Now, what has happened over the years is that professional developers and IPPs have entered this market. They are developing the projects and in turn giving equity, a part of the equity to the consumers, thereby meeting the thresholds for group captive principle. Now, the advantages of doing so are, one, the moment a project is deemed as captive, it becomes suddenly very easy to actually get project approvals from the local SLDC, the state load dispatch center, and the distribution company, because even though the local state apparatus is opposed to open access projects, they are much more amenable to giving approvals for captive projects as against projects selling power purely to third parties. The second major benefit of group captive projects is the savings in cross-subsidy surcharge. Being captive projects in principle, there is no levy of cross-subsidy surcharge on these projects. And if I'm just going back to the previous slide, what you see on this slide is that these open access charges, they vary from, very broadly speaking, from 2 rupees to about 4 rupees across the states. But CSS, or the cross-subsidy surcharge, is a very significant part of the total open access charges. And not just that, it is also the component of the open access charges which is most prone to annual volatility. So that is really a key pain point for both the consumers as well as the developers. And if CSS can be exempted under captive projects as it is, then it certainly solves one of the major pain points for the industry. So really, group captive principle in theory is perfectly suited for meeting the demands of the CNI consumers. It makes getting approvals easy. It not only reduces the open access charges, but it also increases the stability and the visibility over open access charges, because the volatile component is no longer payable anymore. And finally, the consumers can actually work with third-party developers, own a part of the equity, and benefit from all these features, as I just mentioned. The problem is that this principle has been, to some extent, abused in the past, whereby many consumers, because they were not keen to actually put up the equity in these projects, they all kinds of financial engineering structures that came up in the sector based on notional equity, and what was really happening for a long time was that there was a very thin layer of equity supplemented by mezzanine capital, convertible capital, etc., and of course debt, which meant that in theory a consumer could put up almost next to no capital towards subscription of the 26% equity and still get the benefit of a group captive structure. The result is that there has been a lot of pushback by policymakers, both for open access in general, as well as on group captive. And I just want to kind of give, one quick example of Andhra Pradesh. If you see in Andhra Pradesh changed their solar policy, actually amended the solar policy very recently, I think about 3 or 4 months ago, whereby they removed all the various incentives offered to open access projects, which were supposed to be actually available until March 2020. But now that these benefits are gone, the third-party sale model, which basically makes the landed cost of solar power almost at 6 rupees and at par with variable grid tariff, unviable. And that makes captive power the only real option for CNI consumers in Andhra Pradesh. Now, the scrutiny, there is an increasing scrutiny by the local regulators, by the central regulators, Ministry of Power, etc., on how group captive structure is working and what can be done to make it stick to the core principle and not let it be abused to subject to market abuse. So there have been a few amendments proposed by Ministry of Power last year. Now we don't know the full status in terms of implementation of these amendments, but I think the writing is very clear that the rules are going to be tightened over the next few years, and today I think all developers and consumers are accordingly taking cautionary steps to make sure that they adhere to the upcoming structure. And let me just quickly go through what are the amendments proposed by the Ministry of Power, and then Amit will cover and discuss this in more detail as part of his presentation. So there are, in a sense, 3 main amendments proposed by Ministry of Power. The first one is that there is a variation threshold allowed in consumption of power in the original electricity rules. Now that has been slightly relaxed, and there is that amendment, that threshold has been amended to, or proposed to be amended to 15 to 20%, but it is subject to approval by the state government in consultation with the state regulator on an annual basis. The new rules also state that there shall be no more abuse of this 26% equity, minimum equity threshold in the projects, and to ensure that the consumers collectively need to contribute at least 26% of the 30% notional equity in the project, which means effectively about 7.8% of the total project cost, which is about 4.5 crore rupees or 45 million rupees a megawatt. So there is a minimum amount of equity which is stipulated in these rules, irrespective of the actual capital structure of the project. And third, there has to be an annual statement of generation, power generation and consumption to actually allow an audit of each project and a validation of the group captive structure. So really, so there is an increased scrutiny, there is increased focus, increased regulatory compliance burden on these projects. But as long as that is done, we hope that there will be more visibility and more permanence, allowing a greater adoption of RE power by C&I consumers. And definitely what we have seen in the industry today, because of various changes in open access policies across multiple states, the market has actually almost entirely moved from third-party sale model to group captive structure basis. And increasingly, all consumers and developers have reconciled that this is the way to penetrate and grow their business. And these are the market realities in terms of the legal requirements and the regulatory requirements that have to be met. So the conclusion is that group captive is, in our view, the most attractive option available for renewable energy procurement. The rules are being amended. There is a lot of scrutiny, and it is recommended that the developers and the consumers gear up accordingly and do follow the group captive principles, policies in principle and not just on paper. So that is really what I wanted to say, and I will hand it over to Amit now, who can take you through further intricacies, legal intricacies of the structure and the proposed amendments. Over to you, Amit. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Vinay, for your useful insights and covering the topic in depth. So now I would like to invite Mr. Amit Maheshwari, who's a counsel with Trilegal, and I'll just give you a brief introduction of Amit. Amit is an expert in the areas of energy and infrastructure, and he has extensively advised entities in the private sector as well as various governments on bid processes for and development of energy and infrastructure projects. Amit is an active contributor to the policy debate on energy and infrastructure issues and has been involved with a lot of projects, even overseas, in emerging economies like Fiji, Papua, Vietnam, and several other countries. So now over to you, Amit. You can take us through your presentation.
Thank you, Varun, and thank you, WWF, for organizing this webinar. Just wanted to check if I'm audible and the presentation is visible.
Yeah, yes, Amit, you are audible loud and clear, but you need to share your screen so that your presentation is visible. Yeah, we can see the presentation. Perfect. You can go ahead.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, everyone who's currently attending the webinar. Thank you for joining. Vinay, thank you so much for the presentation. It's always pleasure and delight to hear you. It's extremely informative. To jump right into my presentation, what I'd strive to do is to give you a broad statutory and regulatory overview of the legal framework governing captive power projects, and also touch upon few issues that we have come across in developing captive projects, as well as sort of operating and maintaining them from a contractual as well as a legal perspective. I will try and keep both developers and consumers' interest in mind in talking about these contractual and legal issues. Right. So now, as most of you must be aware, that generation as an activity is the primary legislation governing that is Electricity Act 2003, which is a central legislation. What Electricity Act 2003 did was made generation D license, which effectively means that the entry barriers for setting up a power project has been moved, and effectively anyone can set up a power project. Now, to the extent that is the case, the logical question is then technically anyone can set up a captive power project as well. The answer to that is yes. Then why is it considered as a separate asset class? Why so much fanfare around it? There's a bit of historical background to it, which when I also touched upon. The thought process behind considering captive power project as a separate asset class was to allow smaller players which do not have access to so much amount of capital to set up a power project on their own to come together and set up a captive power project. But there's a bit more to it, which is that captive power projects are not a new phenomenon. They've been around for years and decades. This is around 90s, 70s, 80s when the industrialization was picking up, but the distribution utilities weren't able to meet the demand of the cement plants and then the steel plants. The ones with deep pockets decided to approach the government and sought some incentives for them to set up their own power generation facilities. During that point, the government decided to provide certain incentives to them, and they went on their way by setting up their power projects for their own captive use. Around the time when the government and the legislature was coming up with and legislating on the Electricity Act 2003, in their wisdom, they decided that the captive generating plant as an asset class should be codified, which was actually done. And now if you see, there is a definition of a captive generating plant, which is essentially any power plant set up by any person for its own use. Along with that, the incentives available to a captive generating plant was also codified, which is essentially cross subsidy surcharge, which Vinay also touched upon in his presentation. So the distinction between any other power project versus a captive power project, the material distinction is that there is a statutory exemption from payment of cross subsidy surcharge available to these projects, which makes it extremely attractive both to renewable as well as non-renewable forms of power projects. Now, as I mentioned, while the definition clearly says that any person can set up a project for its own use, the question was, how do you establish that a project has been set up for my own use? So about 2 years later, the government decided to issue certain rules. They were called Electricity Rules 2005, in which the conditions for determining what constitutes your own power project or for your own use, in which two main conditions were imposed. One was that any entity which is consuming power from a power project for its own consumption needs to hold 26% of the equity share capital along with voting rights. And such entity should also offtake a minimum of 51% of the electricity, aggregate electricity generated from the captive unit. Now, while these are two critical conditions, some of the points that both the developers and the consumer should bear in mind is that both of these conditions are minimum in nature, which is the moment a consumer holds 26% equity with voting rights in the SPV, the consumer is categorized as a captive consumer, and the plant is, or the unit from the project power is being drawn, is classified as a captive generating plant, which makes you eligible to claim exemption from the cross subsidy surcharge. The obligation that the consumer and the captive plant needs to meet is it should obtain or offtake a minimum of 51% of the electricity generated. Both of these are continuing requirement, and they need to be adhered to on an annual basis. The determination of both these requirements is done at the end of the financial year. Now, one of the bigger lacunas in the existing legal framework is that there is no monitoring requirements in terms of establishing how any entity is going to establish the fact that they own 26% of equity in the entity that owns the project, and the fact that they are of taking a minimum of 51%. There have been few judicial precedents by certain state regulatory commissions, and which have been upheld by APTEL and by some high courts as well, where the ruling is that the obligation to monitor captive generating plants is with the respective state commission. However, in practice, what we have seen is the monitoring is actually done by the DISCOMs and in certain instances, state load dispatch centers. Typically, while it varies from state to state, what also happens is, sorry, just one second. Sorry, so as I was saying that while typically the obligation is with the DISCOM and the state load dispatch centers, and the entire process of registering a captive generating plant varies from state to state. In a lot of instances, we have seen that while setting up a power project, one of the critical requirements is to obtain open access. At the time of obtaining open access from the state transmission utility and or the DISCOM, while making the application, you need to identify the project or the relevant unit as a captive plant, and also submit a CA certificate showing the shareholding pattern. And the consumption requirement is then determined at the end of the year. So that's on the monitoring side. One of the critical issues that we have faced on a fairly regular basis is the test of proportionality. Well, the electricity rules also mention that the consumption of the 51% power needs to be done in proportion to the equity being held by the captive consumer. Now, the requirement of proportionality is relevant when there is more than one captive consumer. To the extent there is a single captive consumer, it can hold 26% equity in the entity and consume the entire 100% of the power. Now, there have been some sort of conflicting judicial precedents issued by certain commissions, and recently a Rajasthan Electricity Commission has passed an order where it said that if there is a single consumer which holds 26% and procuring 100% of the power, it's not eligible to be a captive consumer because the consumption of power is not proportionate to its shareholding. Now, there are other APTEL judgments where this position has been clarified that the proportionality is applicable only when there are two consumers. But from a developer and from a consumer's perspective, when you are entering into such arrangement, it's extremely critical that you look at the fact that if there are multiple consumers, the shareholding and the consumption of electricity is proportionate. The PPA, which in certain instances might have to be shared by the commission and or by the DISCOM, very clearly records this aspect, and the document that may have to be submitted to these organizations very clearly spells out the fact that the proportionality test is being met. Now, that's on the regulatory side of things. On the contractual aspects, the two primary contracts that entities typically should enter into, one is of course the power purchase agreement, and I won't really get too much into the terms of the power purchase agreement because they are fairly similar to what we also call a third party open access PPA. The other agreement which is required to be executed is a share purchase and a shareholders agreement. Now, this is somewhat in instances, especially when it comes to consumer who's not so sophisticated, we've seen that puts them off that I need to negotiate a share purchase and a shareholders agreement. it becomes a contingent liability on the books in certain extent where equity is required to be subscribed, and it becomes a significant investment issue from a consumer's perspective. However, as Vinay also mentioned, that in at least according to the existing regulatory framework, a lot of developers and consumers have agreed to funding the project through nominal equity and then meeting the remaining capital cost through various financial instruments. In such a case, effectively the equity is being bought and or subscribed in order to meet the electricity rules requirement, and the shareholders agreement should be drafted in such a way that the captive consumer should not have any board representation. It should not also have any significant contractual rights. The third critical aspect is the fact that if you're holding equity, it's extreme. The natural corollary to it is that the dividend is also attributable up to the 26% to the consumer. Now there are various ways of structuring this where, because well, under the Companies Act, the dividend can only be provided as part of or through the profit, in which case there are various profit extraction mechanisms, either funding the equity through shareholders loan or entering into some sort of contract, whether it's a services contract, O&M contract, or a management services contract, through which the profit being made by the SPV is extracted and passed on to the power developer. And the financial relationship between the power producer and the consumer remains only with respect to the tariff. That ensures that the financial relationship is clean and the dividend and the tariff does not get muddled up. So these are some headlining items that both the developers and the consumers might want to keep in mind while negotiating a shareholders agreement. That's broadly what I wanted to talk about the existing legal framework. Now, as when I mentioned that the government is now looking to amend the electricity rules and to sort of change the rules of the game around the captive power project. It's also useful to note that the government is looking to do this for last 3 to 4 years. While a draft amendment was issued sometime in May 2018, which has not been notified yet, before this, in about 2016 as well, the government had brought another draft amendment for public consultation, which was significantly revised in the May 2018 draft. It's almost been more than a year and there has not really been any movement on this issue for various reasons, mostly because of election, and generally the sense is that that the rules around the captive generating plant is not really high on the government's legislative agenda as of date. But when these rules were notified, based on our informal discussions with the Ministry of Power, the general sense is that the government wants to put a curb to the abuse that has happened of the regulatory framework around the captive policy. And when I say the policy and the regulatory framework has been abused, I'm alluding towards what Vinay was talking about, that developers have tried to structure it through nominal equity, and the developers don't really have to put in any real capital, and just by subscribing to that nominal equity, you can get the benefit of the exemption of cross subsidy surcharge. Now, the policymakers have become aware of it. They want to plug this loophole. They want to ensure that there are only serious players who now set up captive power projects, and the legislation ensures that the real intent of setting up of a captive power project is reflected in the legislation by requiring the captive consumers to put in real equity proportionate to the capital cost of the project. So to that end, one of the primary amendments that the government is seeking to bring about is that the ownership or the definition of ownership has been changed from a pure play equity with voting rights to issued and paid up share capital in the form of equity with voting rights. They've expressly excluded equity share capitals with differential voting rights. Now, the background to this is that the government initially wanted, in the 2016 proposed amendment, the government wanted to ensure that there is a wider definition of equity so that they can bring about the intent of putting in the capital, and they sought to put in the definition which effectively made or required equity with various rights available attached to an equity shareholder. They realized that there is still loophole in that definition and in that scheme of things, because that does not fully capture the intent of requiring the captive consumer to put in real capital proportionate to the capital cost of the project. So they decided to keep the equity, the ownership definition, not pretty much what it is in the existing rules, but they brought in a more stringent requirement to say that if a captive consumer needs to qualify as a captive consumer, it needs to subscribe to a minimum of 26% of equity, but that equity should actually be 26% of the equity component of the project, and they put in a normative debt to equity ratio of 70-30. So irrespective of how you're funding the project and what your debt to equity ratio is, the consumer has to bring in 26% of the 30% of the total capital cost of the project. Now, while the underlying intent is clear, the drafting is not so well thought out, and there are various ambiguities around it. That how do you determine the capital cost of the project? Is it linked to the capital cost determined at the time of financial close by the lenders? What if the project is not being debt financed and is purely being equity financed? How do you determine that? We expect some of these issues to be clarified in the whenever the final amendments are issued. But this is something that everyone who's looking to get into a captive arrangement at this stage might want to keep in mind. The other significant change is the number of changes in shareholding that could be done anytime during the existence of the captive project. Under the current rules, there is no restriction and there could be change in shareholding a number of times, but they have put a cap on, or they are proposing to put a cap on the number of changes in shareholding to twice in a financial year. This again goes towards the intent that they don't want non-serious players who are looking to do a captive transaction purely to take the benefit of exemption of cross-subsidy surcharge to get into this structure. They want large consumers, serious consumers and serious developers who are looking to set up a captive project, who are committed to put in the capital. Those are the kind of players the government is looking to allow to set up a captive project, and that's the reason why they have said that you cannot change this. If you change it twice in a financial year, that's fine. You change it the third time, your captive status will be lost, and the entire electricity generated in that year will be considered as non-captive and will be required to be considered as non-captive, and cross-subsidy surcharge will be payable. Proportionate offtake requirement. Earlier, as I mentioned, the proportionality was applicable only up to 51% of the energy generated. Now it is extended to the entire 100%. Permissible variations and consequences. Well, permissible variations is something that Vinay touched upon, so I won't really want to get into that again. Consequences for failure to comply with offtake requirements is, again, you will lose the captive status and you will have to pay the cross-subsidy surcharge and the additional surcharge for the electricity generated. the rules also require certification by the state commission, and they've imposed significant amount of reporting requirements. They're looking to designate the state commissions to be the certification agency. To my mind, it's a bit ambitious to do, given the fact that there could be capacity constraint with the state commissions to take up so much work of certifying and monitoring the commission. There's a possibility that the commission may designate a separate entity. An ideal scenario would be that the monitoring and the certification agency is not DISCOM, because they have vested interest, as Vinay also mentioned, that DISCOMs don't want to lose their high-paying C&I consumers. But this, if this comes into existence, this is something that worth keeping in mind, that there will be significantly more administrative requirements. Comparison between the existing and proposed framework, I've covered pretty much all of these points. The last one is that currently there is no bar on conversion of IPP to captive status. So you can simply change your shareholding, get a consumer to subscribe to 26% equity, and you can start getting cross-subsidy surcharge benefit. That's something that's going to be not allowed if the draft amendments in the current form are notified. There's going to be a small window where IPP can convert to a captive, and once converted, that's the end of it. That window will shut. You can't keep switching back between being a captive and a non-captive player in the market. These are the key changes that's coming into existence in relation to captive projects. As a parting note, I concur with Vinay that captive power projects are more appealing to both developers and the consumers. To my mind, even though the rules are the government is looking to make the rules more stringent, despite that, the general sense in the market is that the captive projects are here to stay. The attractiveness of the captive projects continue to be the statutory exemption of the cross-subsidy surcharge that brings a lot of comfort both to the consumers and to the investors, because the exemption is enshrined in a central legislation, as opposed to various open access charges which are susceptible to change by the state government or the regulators. That's a very significant risk which is not there in case of a captive power project, at least in relation to cross-subsidy surcharge and the additional surcharge. That's the reason why I think that captive power projects will continue to be attractive and the way forward for entities which are looking to get into the C&I space. Thank you so much, everyone. Varun, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amit. Thanks for the wonderful presentation and taking us through the nitty-gritties of the group captive policy. So we have received a couple of questions. So I'll start posing the questions to our distinguished speakers. So the first question is for, so I will just, yeah. So there is a question related to Vinay's presentation. The charges that you had shown, somebody wants to know that the charges you had shown for the intrastate, for the open access, were they for the intrastate access or the interstate access? Vinay?
Yes, Varun, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yeah. So the question is that the charges you had, yeah, sure.
Yeah, they were for intrastate open access. The charges also depend on the kind of consumer, that is industrial or commercial consumer, the connectivity, voltage level, etc. So we have made certain assumptions. These are for 33 kV industrial consumers with a certain consumption pattern. But yeah, these are intrastate only.
Okay, thank you, Vinay. So we have another question that that says that pertaining to the group captive principles, and they've been talked about for more than the last 12 months or so, about what is the ground reality in terms of the implementation timeline and for the existing projects?
For the existing projects,
Yes. What is the
so
ground
I think,
reality in terms of implementation?
as I try to cover in my presentation today, almost every single CNI consumer related open access project is being structured along the lines of group captive, and they are basically trying to comply the developers and the consumers in anticipation of the new rules being put forward. They are trying to comply with the existing as well as the proposed guidelines. So there is a lot of developmental activity which is still going on in the market across multiple states. I would say the key ones I would say are Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, and to some extent Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. And all these states, projects are being developed and commissioned as we speak. The only thing is that the market is more vigilant right now. The market is more vigilant, so there is no more, just complying with the rules on paper, but you really have to follow the spirit of the law, and you have to make sure that you comply. You are careful and you comply with not only the existing set of rules, but also as far as possible, the upcoming set of those rules are going to come sooner than later.
So thank you, Vinay, for the answer. So there's another question for Amit. Is the group captive policy uniformly attractive in all the states across the country, or do we have specific states where they are favorable or unfavorable?
Look, so the captive policy, as I mentioned, it's governed by the electricity rules, which is central legislation. So if effectively the rules of the game remains the same, they're prescribed by the Ministry of Power, and therefore they're uniform across the state. The implementation or the administration of these rules in some state is better than the others, or let me put it the other way, in some states is worse than the others. It's again function of where the DISCOM absolutely desists and does not want to lose their CNI consumers. There, the DISCOMs and the load dispatch centers are putting the consumers to higher scrutiny by asking for documents, by trying to revoke the captive status and claiming cross subsidy surcharge on unfounded grounds, on grounds of the fact that the electricity is not being consumed in accordance with the rules. What we have seen is while the DISCOMs are playing foul, once you end up before the commissions, both the developers and the consumers have been able to get relief and get favorable order to the extent that you've been followed the rules of the game and followed the spirit of the law.
Thanks, Amit. There's another question. What is the expected implication of the extensive electrification that is being undertaken by the Government of India and the commitment of 24/7 reliable power supply, power for all the group captive for all the group captive plants in the longer term on the rates and the contracts, and what sort of flexibility exists for grid procurement versus the group captive usage if the grid rates become lower? So this question is for Vinay.
Yeah, it's not an easy one to answer, but I think it is fair to say that yes, the electricity sector in India continues to grow. There is more reliable grid power available today across India. But the fact is that the cost of power is going to keep on increasing for the foreseeable future. And I think even though the cost of solar and wind power is coming down all the time, solar and wind, even today, they account for only about 9% of the total power produced and supplied by the grid. So there is a lot of coal power, there is a lot of hydro, nuclear, and power coming from other sources. And the cost for these sources usually just tends to go up along over time because of inflation and other factors. Equally, the cost of maintaining the grid, extending the grid, upgrading the grid, and all the operational costs of the distribution companies, the costs will most likely go up over a period of time as well. So really, we don't see any scenario where, irrespective of the electrification status across the economy, grid rates are going to come down. Now, that is on the overall, grid tariffs. Now, in theory, it is possible, and there have been various proposals in the past that in order to promote manufacturing and make in India, etc., the government should try and bring down industrial tariffs and not and the CNI consumers should not really be subsidizing retail or agricultural consumers. Now, I think that is a very tough call for the government, as much as there is an economic and industrial logic in that. Again, I don't see any scenario today, given how sensitive power is as a political subject, where the governments will, the state governments will basically countenance increase in retail tariffs at the cost of and at the same time bringing down industrial tariffs. So again, we don't see that possibility of the grid tariff structure being inverted from how it is today. So the answer to that is, we don't see the grid tariffs coming down, and the implication immediately obviously follows that if grid tariffs are not going to come down and indeed are going to go up, and the cost of renewable power keeps coming down, then the savings for the CNI consumers will be more and more attractive over time. Plus, of course, the consumers, many consumers have either internal or external mandate to procure more renewable power. And right now, there is no other structure for them to buy renewable power from the discoms or through any other structures, be it like virtual PPAs or exchanges, etc., etc. So really, in the foreseeable future, we don't see any impact, adverse impact, or any other major options other than group capital structure for procurement of renewable power by CNI consumers.
Thank you, Vinay. So there's another question that says, just a second. So there are a lot of questions which are coming in. I'm not sure we can take all the questions. So we will ensure that whichever question goes unanswered, we revert to all of you with a written reply. So the next question is the non-existence of long-term visibility of banking provision for RE projects a concern?
Yes, of course, there should be. Many of these provisions are subject to annual review, and the process. What happens really is that the distribution company always makes, or the state government department makes an annual review of the policy and the development of the sector, and then they will either through a policy or through a petition to the regulator try to bring about a change. And there have been adverse changes in the past. For example, UP restricted banking provision for rooftop solar projects from 12 months down to 1 month, and it was done almost without any warning. So yes, there are a lot of these risks available in these projects, and that is why. So that is a dose of reality is needed. Projects need to be kind of structured and sized and conceived in a manner that they avoid these kinds of risks. So, for example, the one way to take care of the banking risk, obviously, is that you take care of the minimum load of the customer on a monthly basis and make sure that there is not too much power which is being banked from 1 month to the next month. So yes, there is a lot of uncertainty in the policy and the regulatory regime, and it is up to the developers and the consumers to make sure that they structure the projects conservatively.
Thank you, Vinay.
Hi,
Sure.
Varun, Amit here. Just to add to Vinay on the banking uncertainty, while that's a risk, I completely agree that the PPA needs to be structured in such a way that the guaranteed generation is taken as a take or pay. both for developer and from a consumer's perspective, that ensures that there is certainty. And a lot of states, they also provide that whatever energy that's banked with the discom, at the expiry of the banking period, either it is carried forward to the next banking period of the cycle, or it is deemed to be bought by the discom at APPC. Now, what we have also seen is it's extremely difficult to recover that cost from the discom. One way of looking at it could be that whatever energy that was effectively generated for the consumer's benefit has been banked. Whenever that revenue is recovered from the developer or from the power producer, that should be passed on to the consumer on an as is where is basis, and there should not be any adjustment. This ensures that both the parties are made whole, and there is no impact on the financials and the economics of the project, and that's something that lenders also prefer quite a bit.
Thank you, Amit. So there is another question which says that how the availability of RECs for third-party sale category impact their returns vis-a-vis captive transaction. So any of you answer? Amit?
Sorry, Varun, can you just repeat the question?
Surely. So the question is how the availability of RECs for third-party sale category impact the returns vis-a-vis captive transactions.
I'll just start, Amit, and then you can add on. As far as we understand, the supply of RECs is really constrained right now. So much so that the volumes of the traded volumes are coming down very, very sharply. And the reason for that obviously is that all the projects which are being put up by the government agencies under all the state government programs, they are selling green energy to the underlying utilities, and there are no RECs available for that power. Likewise, most of the projects which are being put up for supplying renewable power to the CNI consumers, they are being they're not availing any RECs because they are actually supplying green power. So they're not only supplying power, but they're supplying green power to meet either the RPO requirement of the customers or to fulfill their internal CSR or carbon emission requirements. So the result is that the REC market is becoming less and less significant, and also there is the additional issue of the cost of RECs. RECs today, the price is about 1 rupee, and most consumers, they don't want to have to buy and pay for normal power and then effectively also pay an additional cost towards REC to meet their RPO requirement. I think it is much better for them to procure RE power at a lower cost. So really, I think REC, in our view, really has no impact on this market. And in fact, indeed, I would go as far as saying that RECs have really lost their relevance. And unless that market is kind of completely rethought and reconfigured, that market is going to die out pretty quickly.
I agree with I mean, from an energy lawyer's perspective, I don't remember the last time I heard REC from a client. So purely from a lawyer's perspective, I think that's already dead.
Fine, Amit and Vinay, thank you. So there's another question which says that how group captive scheme will work if we keep on adding multiple capacities subsequent to the formation of GCPP. For example, initial project capacity is 50 megawatt, and after a year or so, another 20 megawatt is added in the same company or the solar photovoltaic and so on. So how do you think the group captive scheme will work in such a scenario? So either one of you can answer.
Amit, I'll let you answer that.
Sure. No, I'm just, it's an interesting question. I'm just thinking it through. It's not a straightforward one because, well, according to the current rules and, well, for that matter, for the proposed rules as well, it's the designated unit of a power plant whose shareholding needs to be considered. So let me try and explain this. If you've got a 15 megawatt plant to start off with, the consumer must hold 26%. If you're going to add another 15 megawatts to it, you will have to, well, once you're meeting the 26% requirement, that's not going to be an issue because you met that requirement, especially if you're thinly capitalized, which is currently allowed, or it's a permissible structure under the current rules. The problem is going to be once the new rules kick in, because there the equity needs to be proportionate to the capital cost. So if you're going to keep adding the new units to the same entity, the value of that equity will have to be enhanced. So it's going to be a tricky one. It's potentially structurable in the manner in which that I just described. I'm not sure whether I was clear or not, but it's going to be tricky to do that to do it going forward. Especially given the fact that the capital structure and the ownership requirement is now linked to a normative debt to equity of 70/30.
Amit, just to intervene, isn't the 51% and the 26%, aren't these thresholds based on units of project units rather than companies? So it is still, I thought it would be possible that if in the first 50 megawatt project there are one or more customers for which there is a compliance structure in place, and the
Yeah,
same company then sets up an additional, let's say, 20 megawatt unit for which
yeah,
there is a separate set of customers, then in theory at least, there could be a separate notional 26% and 51% arrangement for that 20 megawatt plant. Of course, at the corporate level, it will all get a bit mixed up. But as I think the compliance needs to be at the project unit level and not at the corporate level. But of
you're
course, it does seem messy.
No, you're right, Vinay. And there's a specific illustration in the electricity rule describing what you just described. Uh, while to the extent that you have separate consumers, that's absolutely fine. But what if you have the same consumer whose demand is increasing, let's say 2 years down the line, when the consumer sets up a new manufacturing facility where the demand is for an additional 10 or 15 megawatts or so. So, to my mind, under the current rules, if I hold 26% equity at the SPV level, I'm still meeting the requirement to the extent that I obtain 51% from both the units. The problem is going to be once the rules come into picture.
Thank you, Amit and Vinay. So we are running short on time, and I'll take the two last questions. There has been a lot of interest, and we have several questions which have not been answered. So we'll try and get back to each one of you with written responses soon. So there is a question which says that how can we leverage group captive? It's a question by a manufacturing company who's saying that how can they leverage the group captive in the sites which do not run 24/7, and is there any provision like net metering for the group captive model, and also is there any capacity cap for such models similar to net metering, not allowed for greater than 1 megawatt?
No, so the very short answer is capacity cap, because we are talking about open access projects where indeed the customer's load has to be more than 1 megawatt. So there is no ceiling on project capacity whatsoever. As for the 24/7 part, the load doesn't need to be 24/7 part 24/7. Obviously, the generation is not 24/7, but there is a provision for banking of power allowed under the various state policies, which differs from state to state. So that needs to be complied with. Does that answer the question, Varun, or was there any other component?
That answers the question, Vinay. Thank you. So the last question would be, what is your expectation on the potential market share of captive power renewable energy plants as a share of total renewable over the next decade? And will that share grow in the longer term, or is it likely to remain stable or decline? So what are your projections, or what do you think about this?
So I think today, 2018 was a great year for open access solar in India, and that was largely because of one state which had a very attractive policy, which was running out and did run out at the end of March 2018. Since then, the sector has slowed down very considerably. This part of the market has slowed down. And today, our estimate is that annual addition of open solar is somewhere in the range of 600 to 800 megawatts. And that is not likely to change dramatically unless there is a big policy dispensation offered by one or more of the states. So it is a very heavily policy dependent market. And unfortunately, most of the policy initiatives or changes in the last couple of years have actually been negative. So states have been pushing back on open access solar. So the result is that the share of open access solar or group captive solar in the total solar industry in India is actually pretty small. I think it is, if I take 600 as a ratio of about, there was about 9,000 megawatts last year or 10,000 megawatts last year. So that is only about on an annual basis, just about 6%. So it is not a very significant share. And I think going forward, we expect solar capacity to keep on growing in India because of the strong fundamentals and various economic, environmental, and other factors. But the size and share of the open access market is very difficult to predict, mainly because of this policy volatility. Here and today, I would say that that share is not likely to change much beyond 5 to 7% based on today's scenario.
So thank you, Vinay, thank you, Amit. So we still have a lot of unanswered questions, and there are a lot of questions which are still coming in. So we ensure that we will be circulating the answers to this question. We will be circulating an Excel sheet or something, and we'll make sure that all your questions are answered. So thank you very much for joining us in such large numbers. And I am very glad to share with you that we had almost close to 500 registrations for this webinar. And so we are also quite excited with the level of interest that has come our way. And further to this, we'll be hosting the next webinar in the first week of August, and we'll be coming back with the agenda and the schedule shortly, perhaps by the mid of this month. So thank you very much to join us, and have a good day. Bye-bye. See you in the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.